So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the UK food and drinks exports still getting hammered. Reports show, which shouldn't really surprise anyone given the situation with Brexit, to be honest. This is the first quarter figures for this year, so this is more important because we're seeing kind of the end of the pandemic impacts on the country, and also in Europe. There's still long COVID, still COVID rates are still not great, but kind of seeing the end of the lockdowns and things like that. Things are kind of going back to normal as they can be with the plague. So Brexit is hammering the economy at the worst possible time, the S&P have said, in response to figures revealing a significant drop in food and drink exports. A report released by the Food and Drink Federation on Wednesday showed that exports to the EU in the first quarter of the year 2022 are down by 17.3%, more than £600 million on the same period as 2019. Now, this is obviously bad news. It's bad news because the UK exports are down, which is not great, which means less money in the economy. But it's good news in the sense of we can actually kind of figure out the Brexit impact and kind of cut it away from COVID a lot easier. It's hard for Brexiteers to argue that. Salmon has been hit especially hard. The figures show with a drop of 25%. So of course that makes sense that fresh salmon, especially fresh, is worth the most money. So it's harder to export fresh salmon from GB to the EU purely because the longer it stays in transit, the lower the value gets. And if you can't make it to the EU fresh, it's not worth anything because it would just, eating fish that's gone past the sell-by date can kill. And obviously if you chill the fish, it's worth less. If you freeze the fish, it's worth even less than that. However, whiskey is doing quite well with an increase of 9.4% and 9.7%. That's quite interesting that whiskey is doing so well. Obviously, a whiskey can stay in transit a lot longer. It doesn't really matter how long it stays in transit, really. But it's interesting that's actually gone up, especially given Irish exports of whiskey, spelt slightly differently, have also done quite well thanks to Brexit. So a 9.7 increase above 2019 is good news for the Scottish whiskey industry. Exports to the rest of the world have increased by 10.7%, and that could be because businesses are looking at trying to export to third countries because it might be easier. For example, or realizing that they can't just sell to the EU, they have to look at other markets. Which again, this is good news, but when you combine that with the loss in exports to the EU, it's not good. The increase that they made is 222 million. And the losses made on trade with the post-EU Brexit around 628 million. So again, not great. We've lost significant amounts of money. Comparing the first quarter of 2022 with the first quarter of 2019 overall, UK exports of food and drink are down 7%. However, imports from the EU have actually increased 13.3%. Now, this could be for multiple reasons. It could be the fact that we're struggling to get staff from the EU at the end of freedom of movement, which means that we have to increase the amount of food we import from the EU because farmers aren't able to pick the food. That's probably the most likely outcome of this, because even though that the imports still face customs, etc., we don't really have much choice but to import. You import food or you starve, really, at this point. Quite an interesting report so far. The SNP's Shadow Secretary for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Deirdre Brock MP, said the damage of the Tories' extreme Brexit knows no bounds, with new figures revealing a plunge in food and drink exports to the EU in just the first 3 months of the year, let alone compared to the same period in 2019. And you've got to imagine that during kind of the second quarter, kind of the summer period, it's going to be really bad because the traffic jams in Dover are going to be far worse. So our exports are going to take an even bigger hit. And you've got to think during the winter it's going to get even worse when exports are still quite high and the weather gets really bad. Brexit is continuing to hammer households and businesses at the worst possible time, with Scotland and the UK being hit with rising food prices, increased paperwork and delays, and drop in exports. And exports are where you can make decent money. The more you export, the more staff you can hire because there's new markets for you to push into. Essentially, you've got growing middle classes around the world. As the economy recovers, more people have money, so they can buy luxury goods like whiskey and salmon. But if you can't get the goods to the market, it's pointless. While scandal-ridden Johnson attempts to distract the public with pounds and ounces, the reality is that Scotland's world-leading food and farming sector is being sold out and Brexit continues to cost our economy. We're going to talk about the impact of seed farmers, where you get these farmers who have these potato seedlings, essentially, that grow into big potatoes, something like that. I'm not a farmer or a scientist. And that's really damaged the Scottish economy as well because they can't export those to Northern Ireland or Ireland because of Brexit. The only way for Scotland to escape the long-term damage of Brexit is to becoming an independent country and rejoin the EU. Now, rejoining the EU is very difficult. Scotland can try and join EFTA. Maybe that's possible, but that'll be up to the EFTA bloc to really figure out. And then they'd also have to join the customs union, and they would also have to figure out how to negotiate a potential hard border with England. And the biggest single trade bloc, one which is 7 times bigger than the UK market, which is big burn there from the SNP-NP. But from what you can see from this is the fact that the exports are doing really bad from the UK to the EU, and Scotland, which I don't think their main export is agri-foods, but there are a lot of farms in Scotland and a lot of fishermen in Scotland who are very much struggling because of Brexit, and they'll be a lot more vocal, I think, than the English ones, purely because their government aren't a bunch of lunatics. Scotland have voted predominantly for the SNP, and the SNP are going to be very vocal on this because it bolsters their independence chances, especially when you think about people who told Scotland that if you vote to be independent, you're going to get kicked out. You're not going to be able to join the EU because the UK would just veto the membership. So again, Scotland has a chance of joining the EU in some capacity. It just depends how, especially when I don't think Spain are big fans of Scotland joining the EU because it might help boost kind of Spanish independence in certain regions, like the Catalan region, for example, and I think the Basque region. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. That's a really nice picture of some salmon. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.